name is JT. I'm one of the pastors here at the Well, and happy Easter. We are so glad to have you here. It's going to be such an amazing day. Just before I come here, I found out it's Ann Cusmano's birthday, so another reason for it to be a great day today. So happy birthday to Ann. We're so glad you guys are here, especially if this is your first time at the Well, or your first time being in church in a long time, or the first time that you've been back for many years. We're so glad that you are, especially you're with us. We know it takes a lot of courage to come to church, especially a new church, and we don't want to take that for granted or overlook that. We say it a lot that we're really, we think it's amazing that people can have the bravery to come into a place that they don't know, with people they don't know. So we really want to thank you for being here. And if this is your first time with us, we just want to point out these QR codes behind me. The one on the screen, the two on either side of the stage. They take you to the same place. It's just a list of links. It takes you to our website and our app and that kind of stuff. But there is one in there that says, I'm new to the Well. If this is your first time, we'd love to know that you were here. We'd love to learn a little bit about you. So if you can fill that out at some point during the service, that would be amazing. And we do have a gift for you in the back if this is your first time with us today. Pastor Danny's going to come up here in a minute and begin our teaching for the day. But if you just want to take a second, greet those around you, wish each other happy Easter, introduce yourselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Well. Happy Easter. I'm so glad you're here in worship with us today, especially if it's your first time. As JT said, it takes a lot of courage to come and try a church, whether it's your first time back in church after a long time away, whether it's your first time in church ever, whether you're a regular at church. It takes a lot of courage to come and try new churches. So we're honored and excited to do that. And we say that ad nauseum because we want to say thank you for making that leap of faith to come and to join us. And as you know, it is Easter Sunday, and the most common question I get asked in the lead up to Easter is like, is this like your Super Bowl? Are you exhausted? Is this your Super Bowl? I get asked it all the time. And what I would say first and foremost is every Sunday is a Super Bowl when you're at the Well, right? We are excited to be here. But really, we think the grace of Jesus matters so much that we don't just talk about it one Sunday, we talk about it every single Sunday. And what I tell people when they ask me that, though, is they say, here's the deal. I would not be a pastor, I wouldn't even really be a Christian if it wasn't for the overwhelming grace of God that wrecked my life in the best way possible, and still is in many ways. I experienced grace when I felt like I deserved it the least, when I felt like I didn't have access to it, got a hold of my heart and my life. And if it wasn't for that, I would for certain not be a Christian and not be a pastor. I'd probably be a banker or a salesman or something a little more predictable. I'd probably do that instead. But I do this because it really matters to me. And so I'm excited to be a part of this. And I remember that when I got introduced to the grace for the first time, it was something that blew my mind. We just did a whole sermon series called Mind Blown, talking about the mind-blowing truth of the mission of Jesus. And when I understood and heard about grace for the first time, it radically shifted my perspective of faith and religion and this whole Jesus guy was about. And I remember working at a church that said, in one of our taglines, that everyone was welcome, no exceptions. It was something that I loved, and it was this amazing mantra that I appreciated and I got to run with. It was before I was here, and I remember sitting in our board and talking with my board, and we were talking about this new initiative we were getting ready to do. We're launching a new service, and we wanted to kind of promo it and get the word out and get people excited about it. So what we did was let's get yard signs and put yard signs out in people's yards, not strangers' yards, but our own yards, and let people know that our church existed. And I remember someone in our board meeting saying, well, this is a great idea, but what we don't want to do is put it in the yards of anyone with this certain candidate's yard sign already, because they would not want to come to our church, and they would not be welcome in our church. And I was blown away, because at our church, all we talked about was inclusion and how everyone had a seat at the table. We didn't have the same mantra here. Our mantra is your seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs. We had a generally same ethos, I thought, and what I realized was for some of us, the extension of God's grace had a breaking point. There was an entry point for many of us. Sometimes I think we experience grace and it feels a little bit like a probationary period. You get it, this is awesome, this is cool, but it will end. Sometimes it's the front door to get us in. But what I was going to say was going to be our sermon in the sentence, our big idea, something to cling on to. We forget everything else from today. Remember this, that grace, in Jesus' grace, the grace we rally around and celebrate on Easter is not the starting point, but it is in fact the whole point. God's grace is not a starting point. It is in fact the whole point of this Easter story, this whole thing we do about God's grace and faith in Jesus. And all this Easter story is abundantly tied up in grace. It is not the starting point, but it is the whole point. But I think for many of us, like that sounds like an interesting idea. It sounds cool, it sounds fun, it sounds like something we want to be a part of. But when we get introduced to grace, it feels like something that maybe not initially, maybe not on the onset, but is eventually something that we feel like we have to earn. Something that we have to start paying for. Like it goes from this beautiful gift and eventually turns into this shame-ridden thing where like, well, now I have to pay up. And the best example I have, like analogy in the real world is this, is I've become like obsessed with Duolingo in the last month. I would say Pastor JT and Sadie are like, please stop talking about Duolingo. But ik spreek Nederlands is how you would say I speak Dutch. I'm not learning Dutch. I have no reason to learn Dutch, but it's a fun, guttural language, and I'm trying my hardest to learn it. But what I got, so I downloaded this app, and I'm learning Dutch, and I'm going at it, and the way it works, I've never done Duolingo, you get these hearts, like 5 hearts a day, and every time you fail, you lose a heart. And so you get so many a day, and then like when you run out of them, you have like 4 hours or whatever, so you can re-up and go at it again. And they're really masterful about how they do this, actually. After like 2 days of doing this, I opened a chest after doing a goal, and it's like, hey, you've got 2 free days of Duolingo Unlimited. And I went hard on Duolingo. My wife was like, please stop saying I drink milk in bed every night. I'm like saying all these phrases, like, just let me go to sleep, right? And so I'm saying all these things, and I'm going out, I'm learning all these new words, but then the free trial ends. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Do I pay the $10.99 to keep doing this? Like I experienced life in the glory that was unlimited Duolingo. Do I keep paying for this? And I think when we think about church and we think about grace and we think about our faith, we think about it very much like that. Like we get in the door, we experience it, and we have a certain number of hearts, but then someone says like, hey, you have as many as you need, and you get to live in that, and you move around in it, and there's freedom to fail, and freedom to succeed, and freedom to ask questions, but eventually you reach a threshold, and they're like, hey, now I'm going to need you to start paying your dues. I'm going to need you to start contributing more, maybe going to more things, or giving more, or being more, or doing more. Like grace is no longer the whole point. You realize that it was the front porch, or the appetizer to the entree, or the entire house that you were walking into. And I would say, when we look at the gospel of Jesus, it's completely the opposite of that. Like that would be the opposite of what the Easter and gospel story is. That grace is not something that is earned. It's something that is freely given every step of the way. And I think we see this actually, like the Apostle Paul, one of the most prolific writers of New Testament letters, he wrote a book called Romans, and the book of Romans is an amazing book about grace. If you've never read any books of the Bible, if you wanted to start with a book of the Bible, the gospel would be great. I'd recommend Luke. But if you're wanting to read about people wrestling with the implications of Jesus and his grace, Romans is an amazing book about God's grace. And in Romans, in chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, Paul gives this description of what grace is like. He says in this passage that while we were still weak, while we were still sinning, while we were still a long way off, while we were still doubting or whatever, think about the story of the prodigal son. If you've never heard that, like while we were doing our own thing, and living wildly and abandoning our family and leaving everyone behind, while we were doing all of those things, Christ still loved us. Christ's grace was still offered to us freely, not earned. Christ died for us. Like that is an amazing and compelling story of the gospel that says nothing about earning anything, but it is something that is freely given, and it's not based on our station or our circumstances, it's based on Jesus. So if I was going to rephrase it, I would say that Jesus isn't like waiting for us to get things together, but grace is offered to us freely, regardless of our station, regardless of our circumstances, regardless of how much we're crushing it or how many doubts and fears we have. Like grace is not something that is earned. It's something that's given freely along the way. It's not the starting point or the front porch or the appetizer. It's the entire thing. It's the entire place that we dwell. But I think some of us are like, all right, that's an interesting idea. I can get behind that. That's fine. But many of us feel like God's grace is past the spot. Like we feel like we are the villain. We're like the enemy. We're on the other side. And if you follow me on Facebook, you saw that I wrote a little essay this week on how Disney, I think, has ruined our understanding of God's grace. If you grew up and watched movies from like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, think about all the villains from those movies. What happened to them? They were annihilated. Think about Jafar, destroyed. Think about Scar, thrown to the wolves, quite literally. Think about Miss Trunchbull from Matilda. I just watched that with my kids. Holy cow, that should be a horror movie. That is the darkest kid movie I've ever seen. I'm watching with my daughter, and I'm like, what is happening? Like, the whole time I'm watching it, I'm waiting for this redemption arc to hit, and it just gets worse, right? And Miss Trunchbull is this irredeemable, if you've never seen it, she's the headmaster, she's irredeemable, she has nothing good. And eventually the story ends as it says that she gets banished off, never to be seen again. There's no redemption. There's no arc of hope and resurrection. Her story is written off at the end. And for those of us that grew up on those movies, or parents that parented in those movies, I think that directly impacted how we view God and God's grace and what life is all about. Because if we are the enemy, I think we feel like we are going to be erased, eradicated, annihilated. And on the other side, like that board meeting I had, if this person is your enemy, they don't have a seat at the table. They don't belong. They should be erased and they should be annihilated as well. But what's interesting is the Easter story and the gospel message says the complete opposite of that as well. That being a villain or being wrong or being on the wrong side of something does not put the end of your story in that circumstance. I think about people like Peter, Jesus' closest friend and disciple. We often talk about the betrayal of Judas. Judas betrayed Jesus, turned Jesus over to the Roman government for his execution for just a couple of pieces of silver. But Peter, was Jesus' closest friend and disciple. In his greatest time of need, he denies Jesus, not knowing, and not just once, not just twice, but 3 times. He betrays him and lets him down. His friendship and his trust, he lets Jesus down. But what's interesting is that it's not the end of the story. We fast forward to the end of John's gospel. After Peter's betrayal, he disappears. You don't see him anywhere else in the gospels. But then in John's gospel, at the end, in the final chapter, we see Jesus and Peter having this conversation on a beach. They're sharing fish, and Jesus doesn't say, "Hey man, you let me down," or "You betrayed me," or "You failed me." He asks them 3 different times, simply, "Do you love me?" And every time he says yes, he says, "I want you to go and live in that love. I want you to go and feed my sheep." He doesn't ask him to go to a Bible study. He doesn't ask him to do 10 Hail Marys. He doesn't ask him to repent of his sins and turn and do them no more. He says, "Hey, do you love me?" And the answer to that is yes. The grace of God is abundantly washed over him. His stories are written by just repeating back to Jesus that he loves him. I think about the crucifixion story. Jesus is on the cross, and we see on one side he has a criminal, on the other side he has another criminal. One of those criminals is mocking Jesus the whole time. He's like, "Hey, if you're really the Son of God, save me and save yourself, but mostly save me." And he's kind of mocking him. He doesn't really believe Jesus, and so he says he's at this point, I'm dying, so maybe this guy will save me. And he's mocking him. But on the other side, there's this other criminal who's content with his lot. He's like, "I've sinned and I've done what I've done, kind of getting what's coming to me more or less." And he doesn't say, "Jesus saved me." He doesn't ask for anything. He just says, "Hey, when you enter your kingdom," because it looks certainly like you're going to enter your kingdom. You seem like you're the guy that you say you are. You might actually be this Messiah figure. So when you enter that kingdom, will you just remember? Don't say to seek for me, just remember me. And Jesus says back, he's like, "Well, I'm not just going to remember you. I'm going to see you very truly there in paradise with me." No sinner's prayer, no Bible study, no conversion story, no baptism, no radical life change. Just the grace of Jesus being over his head. I think about the Roman soldiers, the oppressive governmental state that is executing Jesus. There are these Roman soldiers at Jesus' feet mocking him and whipping him and stabbing him with a spear and doing all the casting lots for his clothes. And Jesus doesn't look at them with disdain or frustration. He looks at them, and in Luke 23:34 says, "God forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." He's asking for grace and forgiveness, even in the midst of his darkest hour. I think about when people hurt me when I'm at my best. I don't act like that. And Jesus is in his darkest moment, filled with pain and probably sadness and frustration and wrestling with the human emotions of being betrayed and let down and everything that comes to that. He says, "But my grace is still for that person." And I think for many of us, we think if we are the villains, or maybe we're standing across from the villain, that the world tells us that we or they ought to be erased, annihilated, eradicated, canceled, pushed out of the way. But the gospel of Jesus and the resurrection story says that they are not erased, but they are restored and resurrected and given a new life and a new hope and a new story greater than they could ever ask or imagine. The world says we should erase them, but the gospel, the Easter story, says that they are resurrected. But when I think many of us, again, that's an interesting idea, and that's awesome, and that's fun, and we think, well, what is happening then? Well, Jesus is offering abundant forgiveness. That's what's happening in this moment, right? Jesus is forgiving all of us, and certainly I think that's happening, but I don't even know if that's the most profound and compelling thing that's happening on the cross. I think certainly forgiveness is what's happening, but I think transformation is the most compelling thing that's happening. The hearts of the Roman soldiers are certainly forgiven, but they are transformed as they go and live different lives. The criminal on the cross is certainly forgiven, but without transformation of grace, his life would not, he's transformed in
the actions of Jesus and Easter and the cross and all this looks like is it looks like a blanket over all of our past mistakes. Like we have all these sins and these frustrations and these failures and errors. We feel like we're not good enough, and we just cover them with this blanket known as Jesus and His grace. We treat it like my kids treat cleaning the room, right? Like, so when I ask them to clean the room, they have a bunk bed and they just like sweep everything under it. I'm like, you didn't clean your room, you just shove it under your bed, right? And I do that too. So, I mean, I'm just as guilty as they are. But like, that's not, I think, what the most compelling and profound part about the Easter story and God's grace is. It's not that things are covered up, but like our story is rewritten and transformed into something greater than we could ever imagine even possible. And Paul, again, one of the writers in the New Testament, in his second letter to the Corinthians, in chapter 5, verse 17, says that those who are in Christ are being made new, into a new creation. And I think when we hear that, sometimes we think like an iPhone, like we think about it like this, like I'm going to get the new iPhone, and because I got the new iPhone, I'm going to throw away my old one, like the 14's in the garbage, I got the 16. And I think that's how we often think about God's grace. It's like, we're being created into something new. Let's throw away the old needs. It's not required anymore. It's invaluable. It's trash. It's garbage. But we're going to get the new one, and that's where God's grace is. Like, this is what it looks like. But if you look at like the original language and what Paul was trying to say in his language that he's drawing from Jesus, what he's not saying is we're making all new things. He's saying we're making all things new, which is a minute shift, but an important shift, because it doesn't mean that you are garbage or you were thrown away or you are the sum of your failures or even your successes. But what it means is that God is writing a story through you and in you for a future greater than you could ever imagine. That you are not garbage or treasure because of what you've done in the past, but that is part of the story that God is writing in the future. See, I think grace given through Jesus doesn't just cover us up, but it rewrites our future for us. And if I was going to rephrase it, I'd say that none of us are beyond hope. I think many of us often feel beyond hope or feel like someone else is beyond hope. Maybe we're like, I have enough hope, but maybe they are beyond hope. Like, I would say ourselves and everyone in this room, everyone outside of this room, everyone living in belief and unbelief, everyone living in sin and crushing it, we are not beyond hope. You are exactly who God's grace was made for, and you are exactly where God's grace was designed to lead you. Like, that's what the story of the gospel is. It isn't about living in perfection. It's about embracing the grace of Jesus. It's not about getting it all right, but it's about embracing a story that says that you're all right if you're not all right. I heard a pastor say this earlier this week. He was like, when I became a Christian 16 years ago, I just stopped lying. And I'm like, well, that's a lie right there. Like, there's no way, right? And that's the greatest the gospel story can offer us. Like, I don't think that's that compelling of a story, because the gospel story, the Easter story, is not about being perfect. It is about continually being transformed and conformed into the person God has created us to be. Not uniform, but united in this beautiful, eclectic, diverse mosaic that people brought together to be the community that's a part of the way of Jesus. So I was going to end with this is what I would say to you. First, if you feel like you don't belong, if you feel like you're someone that doesn't have a seat at the table, and that grace has passed you by, I would say that grace is not the appetizer, it's not the front porch, it is in fact it is your home. Like, it is the place that we dwell, it is the place that we find community, it is the place that we find wholeness. Like, this is your home. Do you ever wonder if your story disqualifies you or someone else? Maybe you feel like you're the villain or someone, like, if you feel like that is where you are, I would say that your story is not over. You are not about to get annihilated or erased or pushed away, but I would argue that your story is just getting better. That is where Jesus has done some of his best work. Think about Peter and his betrayal. That is where some of his greatest work was done in transforming him and giving him the hope of a new future. Think about doubting Thomas. Through his questions and his doubts and his skepticism, he saw Jesus in the most profound way and saw him the way no one else was blessed to see him. Like, I think that if you think your story is over, I would challenge you to believe that even if it is hard, that it is also just getting started and good. And at the well, if you're new to the well, I would say this, like, we're a community that maybe you have no connection with and you have no reason to trust us because you've never met us before, but again, we appreciate you coming to join us. I would say that our community is not about perfection. Our community is about being together. Our community is not about certainty. It actually values curiosity. Our mantra being that you're seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs. We actually think we are better because you're here. We think we are the community Christ called us to be because you are here. Does that mean that we're a monolith of the way we act, look, think, and experience life? Certainly not. But when I look at the early church, that's what made it so beautiful. That they were always including the person that was told they didn't have a seat at the table. I hope that is something that our church never loses. Because the grace of Jesus in the Easter story says that not only are our stories not finished yet, but the sharing of the transformation of the gospel story is not finished until everyone knows they have a seat at the table. And so with that in mind, would you pray? God, I thank you that you are always creating more seats at the table. You are never in the work of taking them away or shrinking the circle of inclusion, but you're always expanding, always inviting, always loving, always embracing. And so, God, we just ask that the grace that transformed our hearts to get us here, maybe we've been a part of this way of Jesus our entire life. I just ask that you would help us cling to that hope and that truth, that grace that started this story for us, but help us realize that it wasn't a start line for us to cross, but it is the place that we are called to rest and abide in the entirety of our life. And God, I know that there's many of us in this space that have never believed or heard or been told a story that we belong, that grace included us. And I just ask that you would help us in our hearts begin to believe, begin to experience, begin to know just how much you love us, just how much you are with us, that you have thoughtfully created a space for us, and you are always waiting for us to come back home with open and wide arms. And so God, be with us as we continue to worship, through the songs we sing, through the conversations we have, through the smiles we share across the aisle. God, I just ask that you would help us see that we are a part of something bigger than ourselves, but you love us just the way we are as a part of that as well. And so God, be with us as we continue to worship, move our hearts, our minds, and our souls closer to you and to one another. Pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.